various ways of reporting it, which mean people don't have to give their details, so they can do it anonymously. And people often sort of think, well, if I report it, it's not going to make any difference. It's not that important. But it actually is important, because if several people, if there's instances that are taking place in a particular area, say in one corner of a park in the community, and you witness something and you report it, and a few days later something else happens and somebody else reports it, the police then start getting a pattern, and it starts alerting them to the fact that there is something happening in this area. And it can help agencies to actually look at prevention, look at how they can tackle it. And then the third point really is support. So even if it's just asking the person that's affected, are you okay? If you can, if you're in a position to, just touch base with the person that's affected. After our pilot, we identified that 99% of people, they'd increase their confidence in making an intervention. 102% said that they would be more likely to do an intervention, and 99% that they said that they would be more likely to support somebody that had been affected. So they're very simple messages, but it's been very effective. And I'm just going to finish off with a little case study. One of our ambassadors, I mean, the See Report Support became a bit of a mantra, just as we've got the See It, Say It sorted on British Transport Police at all the train stations. One of our ambassadors was coming home from school with her children. She saw a young man coming towards her with heavy shopping bags, so she moved out of the way. As he walked past her, he gave her a whole load of racial abuse. She obviously made sure her children were okay, but just paid attention to where he was. Now, it doesn't always happen like this, but on this situation it did. He happened to live just yards away from where this incident took place. So she took a note of his address, clocked the number, clocked the street, went home and called the police. And again, the police don't normally respond like this, as has been mentioned before, but the police officer said, well, okay, there's probably not much we can do, but since you've got the address, we'll go round. So they must have gone round. I saw this ambassador, I think it was a few months later, and she's relaying this story to me. And she said, do you know what? She goes, this had happened a couple of months ago. She goes, and I saw that guy a few days ago. And she said, and do you know what? She goes, I looked him straight in the eye. And she said, do you know what he did? She said, he looked down. And she felt, she was very confident and very empowered. And she said, do you know what? She said, he's never going to talk to me like that again. And hopefully he won't do that to anybody else. Now, what's likely to have happened is the police would have gone round. They wouldn't have been able to accuse him of anything, but they would have said there's been an allegation that something has happened. He probably denied it. They probably said, okay, fine, fair enough, there's nothing we can do. But the message has been sent. The police have knocked on his door, made him aware that it's been reported. That person would then probably have had to gone back into the house. And if he's got family, if he's got friends, he probably would then have had to have lied to those people about what that was, why the police were at the door. But obviously when he saw her again a few weeks later, he was ashamed, he was embarrassed. And that's the sort of level of that's the sort of level of impact that we can actually have. So we can all play a role, and we encourage people to play their role. There's no reason for anyone to be a bystander anymore. You can do it in a way that's safe. You don't have to go over and physically or literally get involved in any issues. So that's really what Stand By Me was about. And as you said, Chris, we've now had the go-ahead to actually roll it out across England, Scotland, Wales. So when the lockdown is over and we're able to get out and about again, we'll be going up and down the country, hopefully spreading this message and empowering communities to be able to support some of their most vulnerable members.
That's wonderful. Thanks very much indeed for that, Shamsher. And I think it is such an important message, that empowering message that you just articulated there. And you know, that sense that, you know, that people aren't helpless, that there are things that can be done, and it can have an effect. It may not necessarily always lead to a prosecution, but, you know, the case study that you just outlined there just illustrates, I think, you know, what people can do and the effect that it can have. And, you know, hopefully, as you roll this project out, you know, it will start to have an effect across the country. And I think it chimes in very nicely with the sort of work that we're hoping to do through this grassroots movement to, you know, build community solidarity and raise political consciousness. But look, we've got about 20 minutes left. We started a few minutes after 8 o'clock because of our incessant technical difficulties. We never seem to manage to get started exactly on on time. It sort of kicked off at 7 tonight, and we started just after that. So with permission of the panel, I might just run just a few minutes after 8 o'clock so we can get as many questions in as possible. And the first one is from Karen, and she's asked, to what extent do you think inequality due to decades of neoliberal economics is the cause of the rise of the far right around the world currently? Do you want to kick off with that one, Suresh? Your microphone's muted at the moment. Can you hear me, Suresh?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Could you pick up that one?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's no question that neoliberal politics, austerity, has impacted on the growth of the far right, but it's also been coupled by a lack of rigorous combativeness against neoliberal politics for decades by the labor movement under Blairism, etc. So I think there's no doubt that it's contributed to the growth of the far right, but I think there are other issues that have also contributed, and that one of those critical issues is that there is a distinction between anti-fascism and anti-racism, and I think within the left movements particularly, we have never really dealt with anti-racism stuff. We've dealt with anti-fascism, we've defeated National Front in the 1970s and the growth of far right, etc. But we haven't actually tackled the new phenomena that are arriving. I mean, it's important, there's no question it's important to tackle the rise of people like Tommy Robinson, but it's also important to look at the messages that he gives and the support that he creates, which are not classical fascistic tenets of growing fascism. They're linked to more authoritarian, intolerant, anti-Islamic, pro-Christian narratives. And I think that those questions are very important. And I think because there is a separation between anti-fascism and anti-racism, obviously there's an interplay with that. It's been possible by some individuals to dilute the whole anti-racist struggle and make it much more weaker. And neoliberal politics, the biggest detriment I think that it has led to is the atomization of solidarity within the working class movement. And that includes, when I talk about the working class movement, I'm talking about BME communities as working class.
Of course, yeah. No, indeed, and a question which is sort of tangentially linked to that, and it's from Yassine, I think, and basically asking, how do we progress? There is a cacophony of left activism, which is positive to see, but how do we ensure that our Black representation is led by Black activists and that we're equal partners? Marc, do you want to pick up on that one?
Yes, I mean, this is a central issue that we've been thrashing out with the what we call white left, because they, as Suresh has just said, don't always see the fight against discrimination and bigotry and hatred in the same way as we do. Because you see, if you talk about fighting the Nazis and the Tommy Robinsons, that directly impacts on white people. But if you talk about the fight against anti-Black racism, as we now have to call it, always understood, by the way, racism to be visited upon Black people by white people, but so many people are now appropriated that term. So really, you know, when we're talking about fighting that racism and Islamophobia, and the overwhelming people who are Muslims are people with a Black or brown face, then that's a different priority. And I'll give you an example of that. We launched the Anti-Racist Alliance in 1991. We invited the Socialist Workers' Party, which had been behind the Anti-Nazi League, to have places on our executive ruling body, and they turned us down. Do you know why? they said, oh, well, you know about fighting racism, but we know about fighting fascism, as if they're two separate things.
Yeah.
And they're not.
No, of course not. No.
You know, they're they're two faces of the same monster.
Yeah.
And this is the difficulty. Often our comrades in the Labour Party, trade union movement, even on the left, do not understand what black self-organization means, what black self-determination means, what black people being allowed to choose our own leaders means. And we're fighting that battle again, which, Suresh, I thought we'd got over in the 1980s and 1970s. We're fighting it again today in 2020 in organizations like Campaign for Labour Party Democracy, Momentum, Labour Representation Committee of John McDonnell and Matt Rack. You know, they don't get it. It's like the militant in the 80s who had this class reductionist position. You know, if we sort out the class question, then all will be well for women, black people. We're now denounced as identity politics, which is just a metaphor, really, for putting down the struggles of oppressed in the rainbow, if you like to put it that way. So we have to recapture that ground. We really do have to get our white comrades to understand what racism is all about.
Just on that point, Marc, I mean, there's a question that was posed, not tonight, but on Sunday when I was in conversation with George Galloway about identity politics. And I think for me, and I'd be interested in your comments on this, the New Labour, there was an over emphasis in many ways on, in my opinion anyway, on identity politics, but they'd forgotten about the key importance of class politics. And would you agree that, you know, you have to have, you kind of one without the other in that sense? You know, you need both. If you kind of ignore class, you know, you're missing a trick, really. I mean, at the moment we've got a cabinet full of elites claiming to be the most diverse cabinet in history, but you know, in my opinion, they don't really represent. They don't represent, you know, the communities that they claim to represent. What would you say about that, Marc?
No, I agree. And you heard in my pitch where I quoted A. Sivananda, one of our greatest scholars of the 20th century. You know, people like C.L.R. James, many great thinkers. And it's got to be combined. You know, you don't counterpose one against the other.
No, indeed.
And, you know, maybe we should define what identity politics means. If people are just going to collapse themselves into one identity and that's all they push, I think they're missing a trick. No, we've got to have alliances across the class to defeat the common enemy, which is the ruling class.
Yeah.
And within that ruling class, they have outriders, like the black Tories, you know, but they're representing their class. They're representing their money. Sam Guillemard, Kwesi Kwarteng, people like that, Adama Frié, what do they have in common? They're all multimillionaires.
Exactly, yeah.
And I have nothing in common with them apart from the color of my skin.
No, indeed.
And there are also some people in the labor movement who put their class position as petty bourgeois, what we call bourgeois blacks, first. And I have no class interest with them either. No, so I'm interested as much as you are in class politics. And I think actually black people have been in the leadership of the class.
Oh, indeed. Well,
you think about people like Harry Haywood,
absolutely,
who wrote the book, The Black Bolshevik, who was one of the leaders of the American Communist Party.
Of course, of course. No, thank you for that. I mean, just moving on, there's quite a few questions piling up, so we probably should move on. Now, Shamsher, I just wondered if you got a comment. It's quite a controversial one, or has been anyway, in the Labour Party anyway, and it's from Hamid has asked a question. What effect do you think fake anti-Semitism claims have on diminishing the seriousness with which real racism complaints are dealt with, including real anti-Semitism atrocities? What's your thoughts on that, Shamsher? You're still with us, Shamsher?
Well, as Marc will know, I mean, I think it's had, within the networks of black members, there's been a whole load of discussion about how complaints have not been responded to. I've got 3 outstanding complaints myself that go back over a year now, not even had any acknowledgement that they've been received.
That's
And yet, you know, complaints about anti-Semitism, especially where they're flaky, seem to be dealt with a lot more seriously. And I've become really concerned about the seriousness of, you know, racism against Black people and how that's actually taken by the Labour machinery, as it were, because from what they're doing and from what we see happening, it's not taken seriously at all. And I don't know if you want to add something, Marc. It's a constant conversation that we're having within Grassroots Black Left.
I was just going to bring in Suresh actually, just on that, because
okay.
Have you got any thoughts on that, Suresh? That question, particularly saying that what they describe as fake anti-Semitism claims is actually diminishing the seriousness with which, you know, real racism complaints are being dealt with.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know what the definition of fake anti-Semitism is. I imagine it is obviously people using the notion of Semitism to attack someone because they disagree with some political position, etc., etc.
But Marc Wadsworth was subject to a classic fake anti-Semitism attack when he asked a question at a press conference to launch the.
I won't say that. I think I wouldn't argue that it's fake anti-Semitism. I think I mean, Marc was absolutely pillared for being Semitic when he was not. So if you can call it fake, I would say that it's totally misconstrued and misrepresentation of what anti-Semitism is. So I'm not disagreeing with the definition. I think the notion of fake, because it's used by the right so many times, I hardly use it. But for me, Marc has done nothing which is anti-Semitic, just like yourself has not done anything. It's totally misconstrued. And I think we need to look at the origins of that misconstruction. And one of the arguments that's been used in the IHRA arguments is they've actually started saying and argued over a period of time that actually oppressed groups have the right to determine what definitions they use. And they use the Stephen Lawrence inquiry and Macpherson definition of victim-centered approaches. And I think that's a total misconstruction. For example, if you look at the definition of institutional racism, it didn't just arrive from Black communities. In fact, there's very little input from Black communities. And if you give Black individuals or communities the power to define racism, I think the world will explode. So there's never been that basis. And a definition is born out of very rigorous stuff. And I think the IHRA definition has done three things, which is really, really damaging. I think it has capitulated racism, real notions of racism against Black communities to a secondary place, where Black people, as I said in my introduction, have become mere spectators of debate on so-called racism. I think the second thing is that I think it's been used and the definition itself, because of its.
I think we've lost you. We've lost you, Suresh. You're frozen there.
Sorry, I'm really sorry. I lost you guys.
Yeah, we got you back now. We got you back now.
The network that I'm at.
Yeah, we just lost you for a second.
So, yeah, it's been doing that all the stuff. Keep drawing Wi-Fi. Okay. So I think the second aspect is that I think the fact that you can silence Palestinians in defining their own oppression is a grave injustice of anti-racism itself, because anti-racism has always been linked to the notion of colonial struggle and anti-colonial struggles and how oppressed groups define their own oppression. The fact that the Palestinians cannot even define or have a say in how that oppression took place is one of the biggest capitulations on anti-racism or racism that I've ever actually seen. And I think what we've decided in the monitoring group as an anti-racist charity is that we will make sure that every debate that we have includes the discussion on Palestine, and we will actually make it organically linked to the struggle against racism in this country. So the third thing is, I think, the damage has been done in the Labour Party. I mean, the fact that the shadow cabinet was asked and they would only be allowed to have people in it who agree with the IHRA definition, I think to me, it's one of the greatest tragedies. I don't even know how strong the word should be, but I just feel angry that the 40 years of struggle that we fought against racism has been capitulated to that kind of politics, which are you call fake. I think they are totally misconstrued and actually very damaging. I'm not arguing with the word fake. I think it should be much stronger than that.
It wasn't my word, Suresh. It wasn't my word, Suresh. It was Hamid's. I was just reading Hamid's question. It's not something it's not a term I've used either, but it was Hamid who, and I was just faithfully relaying his question to you.
Could I come in there?
Of course, Mark. Yeah,
because I've got the pleasure of and the privilege of someone who also ran the Stephen Lawrence campaign as an organizer after me, Suresh, and he will know that there's been a total distortion of the Macpherson definition of institutional racism. Or no, I tell you what, where they say that the victim can decide whether someone has discriminated or not.
The definition of race incident.
Macpherson did not say that. And this is being used now, Suresh, by the people who accuse me of anti-Semitism by saying that because a Jewish person thought I was anti-Semitic, therefore I'm anti-Semitic. What Macpherson said, and we've been fighting for this, Suresh, hadn't we, for years, that victims could tell the police, we think it's a racist attack, therefore it should be investigated as a racist attack, but it could be the case that it's then found not to be a racist attack. And that's the bit that they leave out. They say that if they accuse you of something, you are then guilty as accused. And that's a total and utter grotesque distortion of the Macpherson definition, isn't it?
Suresh, did you want to come back?
Well, that's exactly the point I was making, that if somebody claims somebody is being anti-Semitic, it has to be investigated whether it is anti-Semitic. What's being argued as, because somebody is accused of anti-Semitism, what's being argued is that actually don't investigate it. The person is anti-Semitic, throw him out. He's no right of access to natural basis of justice. I think that is a calamity in the struggle against racism, because we within the Black communities know that the legislation and the rule of law has been used disproportionately against us. You know, when we were doing the Stephen Lawrence case, and you know, I came after Marc had introduced the family to Nelson Mandela, and I became the coordinator from the private prosecution right up to the inquiry. And I didn't go and look for Stephen Lawrence's family; they came to us to seek our support. We were so conscious, despite knowing how racist the people were, who had murdered Stephen, not to get the wrong people, because there is historically been an issue about Black people suffering miscarriages of justice, and how the law enforcement agencies use working class individuals and Black people. We're so conscious that we didn't want a miscarriage of justice, knowing what we knew. And I think what this has done within the Labour Party, the whole discussion and the history and the lessons and the politics around anti-racism, as I say, has been misconstrued, misconstructed, and been very damaging. And I think the most damaging for me is that people have been found guilty when they're not guilty. But as equally bad, it actually takes away and silences groups of nations that are actually suffering from living colonialism at this moment. I think that it is worse than anything that you can talk about, and it really makes me angry that has happened. And I'm very angry about this, because I approached people in the leadership when Jeremy was in power, saying, "Do you want us to act? Do you want us to act? Do you want us to come into the debate?" And we were being told, "Don't come into the debate. Don't come into the debate." And I feel very angry about that, because the impact has been for us to actually start the debate and the movement again, reconstruct it on an international solidarity level, rather than building on the gains. And Brexit was a wake-up call for me, because I thought, 60 years old, we've been fighting against racism, we moved forward. Yes, of course, we'll never give up. And it made me realize that Brexit, right up to the deathbed, we'll be talking about racism, and not something that I want to keep on talking about. Been fighting for it for a long time. And this debate on anti-Semitism has crushed the remnants of anti-racist movements that have been built, where we've been silenced. And I think, and I think it's so important. I mean, the person asked about neoliberalism, and we're in COVID-19. I think, yes, we've been shattered by neoliberalism. Yes, we've been shattered by the pandemic, and we will be shattered further by the pandemic of famine and how third world countries face this because of the nature of relations between first and third world countries. But some of the strengths we have is about social solidarity, about living wage, and etc. And we should reclaim that, reclaim those notions of solidarity in defeating racism and also defeating this form of new pandemics that are arriving. And this is the time to actually link up and actually develop a class-based, race-based, gender. I'm actually not into identity politics, I have to be honest with you, not because I disagree with what people are saying. I actually think, if you look at the debates on identity politics that are taking place at the moment at a theoretical level, people are even claiming that Marx was into identity politics because when he saw class for itself rather than in itself as a conscious thing, he was talking about working class identity. I mean, I think you can't, it's an absurd argument that you can make. I think identity politics have brought some of the oppressive nature of social groups, which is very important. And I agree with Marc that you can't just have fetishism of class being discussed in this way. But class is important for this reason, in my view. And I don't want to monopolize this, but I just want to finish this. I mean, yes, Black people suffer, women suffer, they're oppressed, gay people suffer, etc. But the working class has all these components in. In other words, it actually is composed of women, gay people, Black people, disabled people. It is the only class that has all of these social groups in it. That's why it has the power and the agency of changing, not just because of spirit. And I think that's why class politics are very important. Not in a reductionist way.
Thank you, Suresh. We've only got about a minute to go, and therefore this is going to have to be the last. I was hoping to get a few more in, but obviously very fascinating response to some of the questions. And so apologies to people who've asked questions and have not been able to get an answer to them. So perhaps just ask all of the panel. It'll have to be a very quick one sentence response. This is from Angela, and it's slightly off topic, but she's relating the question to the inquiry that the leader of the Labour Party has set up to look at the document that's been leaked recently, talking about the sabotage of the last election and the various abuse of power that some of the bureaucrats were exercising. And what Angela says, how can we trust the investigation regarding the leaked document will be appropriately carried out as one of the panel has made derogatory, biased remarks regarding the left? Should it be passed to the police? What's your thoughts on that? A kind of quick one sentence answer. Who can we start with? Shamsher, what do you think? Are you there, Shamsher?
I mean, my understanding is that the investigation is about how the report was leaked and not the actual sort of content of it. So I don't understand how any investigation is going to give us sort of what we're looking for in terms of the concerns that have been raised about the contents of the actual report. I think that's what we want to have a look at, and in that sense, I would say yes, it probably does need to be handed over to the police.
What's your thoughts, Marc? Very quickly, just one sentence.
I don't think this is anything other than a political issue, and there can only be a political solution. We both went to the law. I spent 4 years and £30,000 raised from a very generous public trying to get justice through the courts, the bourgeois courts as they're sometimes called, and failed because they are part of the system just like the Labour Party. And you won the first round, Chris, and then you were snagged at the second stage. So this is a political struggle. And I've seen loads of letters going out, open letters to this person, to Starmer, to Jenny Formby, the General Secretary. They'll all be put in the bin. What we've got to have is direct action. We've got to mobilize from the base, have a people's inquiry.
Thanks, Marc. Let me move on to Suresh then. Let me move on to Suresh because we're running out of time now. Thanks, mate. Suresh, have you got a comment on that? about that leaked report? What should we...
I think it's, I think the way it's structured is dead in water. It'll be very narrow, very, very, very narrow, not determinal at all. But there will be a public inquiry led by people from outside that framework because of the manner in which health workers have died and how people, relatives of the deceased, want answers and this government won't give the answer. I just wish that Labour Party had thought about it much more stronger. So I think it's dead in water at the moment.
Okay. Listen, thanks very much indeed. We have gone slightly over time, so apologies for that. Thank you everyone for tuning in to another edition of Resistance TV. We'll be putting this out on YouTube so that anybody who hasn't been able to see the whole program can watch it again and share it around if you could. I hope you've enjoyed this evening's event, and we plan many more of these, and tune in next week, and hope you have a very pleasant evening. Thanks for watching and good night.